Well, hello all, and welcome back to What is Truth. I'm your host, Jack Morgan, and on today's episode of the podcast, I am very blessed to be joined by the founder of Exodus 90, Jamie Baxter. I was really fortunate to have someone, just set me up with this interview for St. Michael's Lent, is what the topic of today's conversation will be about. Exodus 90 is doing a modified version of their normal 90-day program, which normally runs from the beginning of the year up until Easter. Instead, this will be a 40-day version of the fast and asceticism, and it has a little bit of modifications to it. We'll get into that whenever Jamie introduces himself and talks about the program a little bit. But yeah, just super excited to have Jamie on. I know myself, whenever I had first converted to the faith, actually leading into my first communion and first confirmation, because I'd been baptized as an infant. Fortunately, because my parents happened to be Presbyterian at the time. So I had those graces. But then whenever I converted to Catholicism, I was getting confirmed and receiving First Holy Communion. And I led it into that with Exodus 90, which is really cool because I had like a band of brothers around me, about like 13 college guys at Auburn University. And like we all like lost our minds at the after party after the Easter vigil whenever we broke the fast. So it was just really, really awesome work that Jamie's company has been doing for the past 10 years. It's actually the 10-year anniversary. And so, yeah, just really, really excited to have him on and to hopefully allow, a lot of life transformation, a lot of sanctification to happen through the men who listen to this episode of the podcast and decide to embark on St. Michael's Lent, whether or not you're listening to it today on the first day of St. Michael's Lent, the Feast of the Assumption, or, 10, 15 days into it. There's always room to join the train. So, without further ado, I'll read a little bio real quick for Jamie. So Jamie Baxter lives in Westfield, Indiana with his wife, Colleen, and 3 young children. Jamie studied philosophy, Catholic studies, and classical languages at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, and theology at St. Meinrad Archabbey in southern Indiana. He began working full-time on Exodus 90 in 2015 and celebrates its 10th anniversary this year. Since that time, more than 250,000 men, says 250,000 men, from 70 different countries have become Exodus men. Exodus 90 serves men of all ages in becoming uncommonly, love that word, uncommonly free through daily, year-round personal formation on the Exodus 90 app. So without further ado, Jamie, please introduce yourself. Maybe tell us a brief story about, just kind of how you started the company Exodus 90.
Jack, thanks for having me. It's so humbling to have this opportunity. I've been looking forward to it. I've needed to move the time around a couple times, so thanks for your flexibility too. I so greatly appreciate that. So St. Michael's Day actually marks 10 years, which is very humbling. I wake up every day just like, wow, we still get to work on this thing. This is exciting, In the early days, you don't really know, if what you feel called to build will end up being that helpful. And it's been really humbling to watch Exodus move, even for you to share how, played a part in your preparation for your sacraments is deeply rewarding to me. I've been talking to a lot of men this week as we've been anticipating our St. Michael's Lent start. And I think you're the third guy in the last like 24 hours that said that to me, which is just incredible. I do believe that obviously our sacraments are to be prepared for, these moments of life-altering grace. We should enter into deeper prayer and sacrifice as we kind of construct a dwelling of our bodies, minds, and souls to receive the grace of the sacraments, which we're so fortunate to receive in the fullness of the Catholic faith. So anyway, super grateful to even hear that tidbit there. It's been a long road. I'd say, and it's really at times hard to believe what's happened with the project. So many moments where, there was a little uncertainty and then just someone would reach out with the story, that was the encouragement to keep going. But also I feel like the Lord's been very gentle with me and just reminding me to keep going, and um, that the impact is in the future. Those are words I used to that were just seared into me, in the earliest days when there wasn't much to show for it. But as for what's happened, I mean, yeah, what you shared earlier, it's humbling to hear that myself, and whatever we put into it. And admittedly, we put in a lot to it. I got a great team now that really fills all my gaps. Um, but whatever we put into it, the Lord has disproportionately blessed, and I'm just grateful to be a steward of it, and trying to grow along with, um, this growing fraternity, of men of all around the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really love what y'all are doing. In a particular way, as someone that became Catholic, coming from a tradition that was it wasn't more feminine in the Protestant tradition that I was from, kind of non-denomination evangelical. But there was kind of a de-emphasis on just the fact that God, one of the names of God is not success in the sense of like a worldly sense. It was not the prosperity gospel. Like it's a common misnomer for the church that I was a part of, but there was elements in the sense like, God wanted you to like really succeed in, your evangelization, and like there was a lot of de-emphasis on the fact that being a Christian is hard, like really
Mhm.
hard, and you may not ever see the fruits of it in this lifetime. And so coming into the church, seeing the Desert Fathers, and I know that y'all are doing the Desert Fathers in a Year podcast. My dad actually listens to it every day, and he loves it. But the Desert Fathers have been like a massive thing. I actually have a collection called the Evergetinos right behind me. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but it's just like literally like a massive collection of the Desert Fathers sayings. It was written like right before the schism that happened in the East. It's by an Orthodox publishing company, but from Saints pre-schism. Anyways, I like read them all the time because I just love the wisdom of the Desert Fathers, and I really love just this emphasis on asceticism that's found in Catholicism. I think that's why like Catholicism is a very masculine religion. And so I really like that, like y'all are doing a lot to revive that tradition in the church, or at least like let people, especially laymen, know about that tradition. Also, like that we're called to do that. We're called to, obviously, maybe you and I are not called to wear a sackcloth and ashes and go in the middle of the desert and like abandon our families and friends, but we're called to like that interior asceticism. And Exodus 90 is like a really great way to like introduce men to that. So obviously, like a lot of people know what Exodus 90 is, but not that many people know what St. Michael's Lent is. And so, did you make up St. Michael's Lent? Obviously, I don't think the answer is that. But if you did not, maybe who are some of the saints that inspired the practice and tradition of St. Michael's Lent?
No, we didn't make it up. I'd say, but it is a forgotten devotion, and it has ebbed and flowed throughout the centuries. So to really even talk about St. Michael's Lent is to talk about St. Francis of Assisi. So we're writing a book actually on the devotions to St. Michael, and with emphasis on St. Michael's Lent. Um, and kind of in our research around that, we found periods of fasting preparing for St. Michael's Day as early as the 11th century. So the idea of fasting for holy days is nothing that starts with St. Michael's Day here. Um, and I'd say just the church's devotion to St. Michael is ancient. Okay, so the feast of St. Michael, traditionally September 29th, now the feast of the Archangels, um, dates all the way back to the 5th century. And that's because obviously St. Michael makes the appearance in the book of Daniel, and then obviously strikingly in Revelation, so Old and New Testament. Um, and in Scripture, we know that St. Michael is the guardian angel of the people of Israel and the commander of the heavenly host. So he has this, he bridges both testaments, which is why we see such devotion to him, in the earliest stages of the church. But this idea of preparation for his day is intensified profoundly in the life of Saint Francis. And we find in Bonaventure's Life of Francis that he observed this period of prayer, intense prayer, fasting, solitude, um, and with night vigils to prepare for this holy day. And one of the nicknames for Saint Francis is the angelic, an angelic saint. The Franciscan order, one of the names is like the seraphic order. So there's this real connection of Francis to the angels. One of the three churches he rebuilds. Everyone famously knows that he receives this invitation from the Lord to rebuild, the church, which is falling into ruin, is what the Lord says to him through the cross at one of the churches, Saint Damian, Saint Damiano. But he rebuilds three churches before kind of realizing, oh, I'm called to become a source of spiritual renewal for the Church Universal. But one of those churches was Our Lady of the Angels, and so, Francis has this profound sensitivity, awareness, and really lives from a real cosmic vision of our faith, which we should all live in. That realizes the whole of creation, not only what we can see, not only the material realm, but the invisible realm, which we profess in the Nicene Creed. And that's one of the elements that we're kind of sewing into St. Michael's Lent this year on the Exodus 90 app, it being the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea in 325. So it's really, to talk about St. Michael's Lent is to really kind of take a trek into Francis's spirituality. And we're so fortunate to have actually a couple of Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, Father Innocent and Angelus Montgomery, who are our spiritual guides this year on the app. And it's actually, we reached out to the CFRs 4 years ago and we're like, hey, we really want to revive this devotion. What do you think? And they were just thrilled, and that, they practice this, with intensity. And and I would say we actually found, so you see the devotion ebb and flow throughout the centuries. Generally it can just be a time of greater prayer and fasting, emphasis, being on Francis, but it doesn't have a real concrete expression. We found this year kind of, we find new things all the time. And this year we found that a spiritual directee of Saint Padre Pio wanted to revive it as well. And people often don't remember Padre Pio, obviously a Franciscan, also received the Stigmata like St. Francis did during St. Michael's Lent of 1224. So, but he lived, 700 years later, but he dies in 1968. And that's a realm we can relate to, living in 2025. But even during his time, a directee wanted to revive it. He was fully supportive of that. And from what I understand, even in the 50s, there was a devotion to, for St. Michael's Lent that was widely distributed, presented to the Pope even. But it really hasn't taken root, right? So that's why you even ask, like, are you making this up? And it's like, no, we're not really. But we're just trying to revive and then give a particular expression, for the guys that kind of follow the Exodus way of life. This kind of focus on growth in personal freedom, through growing in silent prayer, the contemplative life, the practice of asceticism, and the support of a local brotherhood. So that's what we're up to. That's where it comes from.
Sick. Could you maybe touch on, just very briefly, the phrase uncommonly free? Because I also saw that whenever I was downloading your app, for Exodus 90, it's like the uncommonly free app or something like that. It's like a subtitle. Yeah. So how did your team come up with, or like kind of land on uncommonly?
Oh, it's a great story, actually. So I'd been at it for about 7 years. And I'd say honestly, I was a little bit burned out. And I was just like, I was kind of lost at the time in terms of like, what was this whole thing for? Why is this even working? Do I want to keep working on this? Honestly, yeah, maybe could even confess to being a little bit bored. Because and I used to be kind of afraid to admit that in public because people are always like, "Oh, you got to be so passionate about your work,"
Yeah.
blah blah blah. And then you read the Desert Fathers, and one of the greatest struggles of the desert is just sheer boredom with the life. So I'm like, you know what? If the Desert Fathers can, if Saint Anthony the Great, one of the greatest saints in the history of the church, can admit to being sheerly bored with it at times. I'm more comfortable admitting it
Yeah.
publicly, but I was just a little bit lost. And so we took a discernment retreat as a core team with two guys just deep in the spirit. And it was out actually in Vancouver.
Ooh.
And I didn't really know what to expect, when we showed up there, but it was easily the most significant week in the history of our apostolate. And we just discerned, what's the vision of this thing? What's the mission? What are our charisms? What are those gifts that when we're faithful to them, we're fruitful, and all those things kind of came together for us in that discernment retreat. And it's really then that we really crystallized the fundamental kind of why we existed, that was to be uncommonly free, and to create a place of formation for men that desired greater interior freedom, as well in their own life. When we talk about uncommon, I guess it's perhaps just a reflection on the fact that it's completely normal and totally understandable to be distracted, addicted, enslaved, not quite, who we were made to be. We're fallen. Those effects are compounded by personal sin. We live in a challenging time, in so many ways. And so I don't, we don't look out at the world with judgment, instead profound compassion and understanding, why so many men wind up in so many different forms of bondage. And our invitation is to it's to an uncommon way. It's not easy to commit to daily silent prayer. It's not easy to, begin to practice the ascetic tradition of the Catholic Church. And it's not easy, to overcome the loneliness of our time. I mean, so many guys today, so many good guys that practice the faith even, are known by nobody. Really, like not actually known. And there's no place in the world in which they can actually share who they are, what they're really struggling with. And then when things happen, we always like, what happened? How, where'd that come from? And it's like, no, man. I mean, it's just, there's always breadcrumbs before. And so what we want to do in Exodus Fraternities is to create that space to be known, to be heard, and to go on an adventure with guys. I think one of the things that's so interesting about men, and this was taught to me at a young age, is guys struggle with friendship. Like when you just say, like when you show, if I were to ask you, hey, Jack, be my friend, it's like, that's a little weird. It's just like, I don't know. That doesn't quite jive. But it's like, hey, Jack, let's take an adventure. Let's play a sport. Let's go do something in the community. Let's go read a book. Let's go do something, in that action and going out of ourselves for a purpose, we find ourselves in bonds of brotherhood. And I think that's why Exodus 90 has worked is guys commit to taking an adventure together, and the brotherhood just kind of happens, in response, to that. So that's a long way of saying, or kind of explaining where, and why we talk about it as uncommon freedom, not as judgment, but as just a recognition that it's hard to live this way. But I think many have found it to be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really love that. I also feel like there's something about it that seems like daring, which is very attractive, especially like for men nowadays. I mean, you see a lot of men, like disaffected men online, yeah, like the manosphere and other things like that, where there's a lot of disaffected young men, and I feel like they're looking for yeah, something to challenge them, something that like beckons to their soul, and like speaks to them in a deep way, like a life of meaning. And I think uncommon is such a great word for that, like to be uncommonly free. I feel like that's like a desire that is like innate in like every man's life. And just as a kind of a thing that you said, adding on to what you
Can I
said
tell
about
you a story,
adventure.
actually? Can I tell you
Yeah,
a story
sure.
about so the word uncommon? I agree. There's something about the word that I always liked. And there was only one other time in my life where it stood out to me. And I don't know where I was, but I was watching some, just like maybe like the news, honestly. And there's this story of this young man who flew planes with his father. And one day they were flying their plane and they crashed and they were both severely hurt. And the father told his son who was doing this interview, hey, it's going to be easy to like feel bad for yourself, but let's be uncommon men, and let's not make an excuse. Let's get back to who we were before the crash. And they said okay to that. So they're flying again. So they overcome all that to fly again. They crash again. The dad dies, and they're interviewing the young man. And the interviewer just asked, like, I mean, what was that like? Crashing again. And he just said, all I know is that I need to be an uncommon man, and I need to get back up, be grateful. Grateful for my dad's life. Thankful for my life, and keep going, keep flying. And
Wow.
I just thought, and it was kind of outside of a context of God or anything. It's the
Yeah.
only time, just like that, those words, like, be an uncommon man. I was like, that is so inspiring. Like, that is
Yeah.
so profound. And so anyway, when we went on this retreat, I mean, this was 10 years after that, even more maybe. I was like, yes, that's it. That's why we exist.
Yeah. There's actually, not necessarily using the word uncommon, but speaking of, like, men that inspire, that inspire other men, one of my friends, Amelia, she was talking about her husband one time. Her husband's named Chris, and, Chris is, like, super humble guy, he's awesome. But he wasn't in the room, and she just said, "Yeah, one thing I really love about Chris is he never complains. Like, I don't think I've ever heard him complain." It's like, dang, like, I want to be that. Like, that's uncommon. Like it's just so normal for complaint to just, like, whine about the things. And he's a freaking, like, in medical school, working in, like, hospitals in New York City as a Catholic. Like, there's so many ways in which he could just come home every day and like want to complain about things. But just, yeah, there's just something really incredible whenever you hear a man do something like that, do something uncommon. And I feel like that's like a desire in the heart of men, is to do something that stands out, not necessarily for, like, the sake of our own glory, but for, yeah, just the I don't know, just the fulfillment of our telos. There must be something in the heart of man that speaks to doing things like that. Um, and so, one quick little thing too, talking about adventures, one tidbit or advice that someone gave me one time was that men bond through adventure, women bond through, like, chatting and talking. So, like, if you want to deepen friendships as men, like, you don't sit on a couch and, like, watch a movie or sit around and, like, chat. Like, you go and, like, throw an axe or just something. Like, you go do something. You go out and go hike in the woods. Like, men just build naturally through, like, activity. Which is, it makes sense, like, in the sense of kind of our ontology, as male and female, which is cool. But yeah, could you briefly talk a little bit about, the disciplines for St. Michael's Lent, and then maybe save the night vigil for the end and give a little
Okay.
bit of a briefer explanation of that? Because I love the concept of vigil. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, so everything we do, so we look at the Exodus 90 app as a daily personal formation plan for men. So we got something, for guys every day of the year that's typically grafted in some way to the liturgical calendar. So our summer programming was, we called it Kings of Summer. We were working through the first and second Samuel, and kind of comparing and contrasting the life of King David and King Saul. And but we were also every day raising biopics of saint kings throughout history and trying to highlight their virtues and apply them to our own lives. Anyway, that's just an example. So, but every day we kind of put forward a challenge, to our guys, of different intensity. It depends on, if it's kind of a fasting season or a feasting season. So maybe one other thing is, obviously here we're talking about Lent. Everybody thinks about Exodus 90 as an extended Lent. We also throw an absolutely banger Easter experience that's all about celebration and sustained festivity. And we're not quite known yet for our festivals, but we will be if things work out. Okay, so I do just want to caveat this as we talk about St. Michael's Lent here. It's like, you know, we do try to sow the spirit of the Desert Fathers into everything that we do and all of our work, but um, there's also an element of, our fasts are preparations for Catholic feasts. And, back in the day, we were known for our celebrations, perhaps even to excess. And I do think we need to get back to that, to really bear witness to the joy of the gospel. And I do think there's something about celebrations and feasts that make evangelization so easy. And I don't know. I just think we make it kind of hard on ourselves when we stop celebrating like we should.
Yeah.
So anyway, so St. Michael's Lent, as with anything that we do, is there's always a prayerful, ascetic, and fraternal component. So we encourage guys to commit to daily silent prayer. We're reading through St. Paul's letters to the Ephesians and Colossians. Again, trying to enter into a full Catholic vision of reality, where, kind of really starting to enter into the cosmic vision for our faith that St. Paul lays out so beautifully in those letters. And it's almost like he just pulls back the veil on reality for us to see so far beyond the material, but into the angelic realm. So we're trying to do that each day by way of scripture, and then encouraging guys into silent prayer. So it's easy to fill our prayers, with vocal prayers and devotions, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But we really want guys to get into the habit of dialogue. God is alive. God moves. God speaks. God inspires, and we really try to create a forum for guys to begin to deepen those prayers, and hopefully for them to become more passive, for God to take more of a role actually in them than even we do. And so that's a real emphasis for us, all year round, but during St. Michael's Lent, perhaps in particular. So those are kind of on the prayer sides. In addition, we're praying the Nicene Creed each day, again, kind of commemorating the anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. In which we hear right at the beginning this idea that professing belief in all things visible and invisible, which is such an interesting fourth line of our creed, and we're trying to flesh that out, as well. So that's kind of the spiritual components to everything. But we're really big in embodying our faith, and I think this is so important for everyone today. In a digital age which alienates us from ourselves and from our peers, is to put what we believe, into practice, and for that to manifest itself in our bodies. And so we're focused on rest in a particular way, getting the rest that we need at night. And then also kind of committing to some hard practices, which are waking up at a consistent time, each day, and waking up when we say we're going to wake up. I had fully admit to struggling with that as well. So I ushered that challenge in part because I felt like I needed that too. So those are elements there. I'll get into, we have another sleep component here with our vigil, but you asked me to save that, so I will. We're kind of refraining from social media and news, for obvious reasons of kind of creating a more still environment in our hearts. And then on the practice, kind of the fasting sides, Wednesdays used to be fast days, for early Christians. So of course this was, the day on which Judas betrays Jesus. And we remember this in a particular way during Holy Week, on Spy Wednesday. We try to remember that all throughout the year, though, and kind of raise Wednesday as a day of penance. And so on Wednesdays and Fridays, we're fasting, abstaining from meat, and we're taking a cold shower. So that daily E90 discipline kind of makes its way into Wednesdays and Fridays during St. Michael's Lent this year. And then we're also really encouraging guys to honor Sunday as a day of leisure, rest, a day in which we exercise the higher capacities of our beings. For those activities that raise our minds and souls to God. That could be listening to good music. It could be obviously being outside, reading scripture. But reading good literature, the arts. Painting. All those activities we try to really foster. On Sundays, and of course, just sharing time with those nearest us, those we love, our spouse, our kids, those in our communities. So those are really kind of the practices, the kind of the ascetic aspects of St. Michael's Lent this year. And then every week you meet with a fraternity. So we try to, embodying this experience has to take on a community expression. So our groups happen in, small groups of men, fraternities of men, 4 to 6 guys, preferably. Our encouragement for guys as they start is not to be afraid to invite anybody, into their fraternity. So what people often don't know when they, especially people in the church who, try to mark all the lines of who does what, where, all that kind of stuff. They often miss actually that, Exodus is not just for perfect Catholics. So 10% of our guys and growing are not Catholic. And I love that about what we do. There's a lot of evangelization that happens, lots of conversions that happen, among other things, in the fraternities, which is awesome. And I just think that's so important. I truly believe that loneliness is the epidemic of our time. We have so many like partial connections to other people, but we need them. We absolutely need to be known, like we were talking about earlier. And so that's, in part what these fraternities are for. So those are kind of the practices, the prayer, ascetic, and fraternal components. I did leave out the night vigil, which we're practicing on Friday mornings. So at 2 a.m., we're waking up together as a fraternity and praying a night vigil. But perhaps you have a more specific question about that. But that was something we started last year. And it was a bit of an experiment, to be honest with you. I had no idea what that would be like at scale. And oh my gosh, the response to it was just overwhelming. So we're going to keep that going during St. Michael's Lent this year.
Awesome. Yeah. I'll have a follow-up question about that just because I love the concept of vigil. There's a couple things. One, I love the revitalizing of Wednesday as a fasting day. And just in general, one of the things that your project is doing as a whole has been like to reintroduce the practice of fasting into a lot of a lot of Catholic men's lives. And one of the books that I have on my shelf behind me is this book called The Spirituality of Fasting. It's a decent book. I wouldn't necessarily be like, people definitely have to buy it. But in it, I remember the one thing that struck me so much was there was kind of an anecdote from a visit the Coptic Orthodox took to to Rome at one point in time. And they said, "Yeah, we basically have the exact same faith as y'all, but we can't be in communion because you've abandoned fasting." Now, that's not necessarily. Now, is that fair in total? And is that a good way for like determining communion? No. But I do think that that should be an onus on us as Catholics, is like we can't like scandalize people by like abandoning like um ancient Christian traditions, like in the sense that not the church hasn't abandoned them, but we as lay people and as members of the body of Christ have neglected them, at least recently. And I remember to kind of testify to the ancient Wednesday tradition of fasting. I'm pretty sure in the Didache it talks about that. So like the earliest text that we have, extant text outside of the New Testament, that like gives all this information about the Eucharist, about baptizing and other things. It talks about how we fast on Wednesdays and Fridays, which just is really cool. I also love that for St. Michael's Lent, there's this really beautiful kind of um, posturing of the heart that occurs through it that's a little bit different than the normal Exodus 90, where there's not as many disciplines, but it's almost like setting up, to me, kind of the groundwork for continuing those disciplines further on. So like doing the cold showers on Wednesdays and Fridays. Like today I woke up, I normally try and do cold showers just because like they're so great. But or at least colder showers. In the wintertime, I'm still so bad whenever it's wintertime.
Yeah.
It's really hard. But just kind of that bodily like mortification that happens there is really awesome. And then also just the idea of fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays. Um, and the rest of the days of the week, like there's no limit on like eating sugar or other stuff, which not saying that people can't add on top of that, but that's what like most people's lives are, is you don't have these necessarily like rules throughout the rest of the year, but Wednesdays and Friday fast should be like a thing that should be a part of our faith. And so I really like how the program sets that up.
No,
Um,
I'd just say that's a great observation. I think it's really important for all of us to live by a plan of life. There's a reason why our great religious orders live by rules, and those, kind of form a habit, and a shared life, for particular charisms in the church. And for lay people, it's different, with our own circumstances, families, local communities, customs around us. But we need a plan of life. And, I think what's nice is it can be really flexible, but we need intentionality, at least in my own experience. When I'm not living by a plan of life, it's just so easy for me to just gradually conform to the ways of the world. And I just start hearing the world in me at
Yep.
times.
Yep.
Um, I really do. And it's, but when I'm living by a plan, and, doing the best that I can and striving, after an ideal, I'm just in a much better place than when I'm just drifting. So this is something that we've worked on for years and are only more focused on now, is really kind of making Exodus 90 not just into this kind of challenge based thing,
Yep.
but also a customized plan of life for, where you are, and perhaps particular virtues and vices that you're working through, in a given time. So I think it's so important. And I would just also say that in terms of fasting and just the ascetic tradition as well, I mean, there is so much that the East has preserved so beautifully, which we need to receive and remember.
Yep.
And we're trying to do that, within our work. At Exodus 90, we have a growing population of Orthodox guys even within the fraternity, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Actually, our voice artist on the app is a farmer named Jonah, who's an Orthodox man, and we receive a lot from those conversations with him and with others. So
Yeah.
I would just say too, it's just important. Like why is fasting and why is the ascetic tradition so important? And what does asceticism even mean? It just means training. And what we're trying to do, and Bishop Eric Varden, this bishop from Norway, whose writings have
He's
influenced me.
awesome. He
Okay,
is
yeah.
awesome.
So he's influenced me a great deal. And one of the things he talks about, and these were in some conferences that he gave to some brothers, to his community when he was the abbot of a Trappist monastery in England, was the idea that we need, when we construct a dwelling for God, through practices of prayer and asceticism, it's not that we induce God's favor, and like win these graces from him. It's that when we look at the biblical accounts and we look at the lives of the saints, it's just the case that when we construct a dwelling, worthy of receiving God, he so often in his good pleasure and desire to dwell within us comes to dwell inside us. And I think that's the right approach to it. Asceticism obviously is not about proving something to you or anyone, or it's nothing like stoicism. It's nothing
Yeah.
like, the pitfalls of macho things. It's just
Yeah.
not what we find, in a full Christian tradition. But I do believe it's indispensable to living a full Catholic life today. I was actually in one of Bishop Barton's books I was reading recently. It's in The Shattering of Loneliness, which
I
I
love that
cannot
book.
recommend highly enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So towards the end of it, it's a book on Christian memory and remembrance, and a couple of verses in the Bible that specifically call out, remember, this, Lot's wife, as an example. But towards the end, there's the story of this young man like you and me who shows up to the Saint Seraphim, who's an Orthodox saint, and he's just super discouraged by all the prayers, all the fasts, all the vigils, all the practices of his church, and he's just like, "What's all this for?" And Saint Seraphim greets him in the wilderness, as he did with anyone whenever he saw a person, which was rarely as a hermit. He says, "My joy," and he anticipates the questions of this young man's heart. He says, "All these things are just means, though indispensable means, of what's important, and that's acquiring the Holy Spirit and becoming someone in whom God is alive, and realizing the dimension of glory that you are called to participate in as being made in his image for his likeness." And I think that's exactly it. It's like, that's what asceticism is supposed to be about. That's what we're trying to teach. Um, and that's what's just modeled to us all throughout history. Um, you just don't really see it another way. These practices are there in the lives of the saints.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just so good and so essential. I kind of have always, because there is a pitfall for Catholics of thinking that you're maybe earning God's love, or that therefore if you do stumble in a fast, that he's like disappointed in you, and like, um, there's just a lot of ways when we get in our head. I just like to think of it as my senses are numb. Both my spiritual and my, like, physical senses, they've been numbed by sin, so I don't even experience the world as much as I should, and that kind of falls in line with the tradition that says that both Jesus and Mary would have suffered a lot more than humans normally do, and the sense that their pain would have been greater because they would have been more, like, acutely aware of their senses and the pain which is being caused to them, etcetera. And so I've always viewed like this idea of fasting, at least since I've become Catholic and heard this way of explaining it, as just opening yourself up, one, to be more alive, like you were saying, um, but also kind of just making yourself this receptor, this temple, obviously, like kind of reforming yourself to where you're a temple, to where God, who is constantly trying to communicate to us, like there's obviously extraordinary mysticism where people literally see, like, crazy things, not literally crazy, but you know what I mean. Things that are extraordinary. But there's also ordinary mysticism where God just like speaks to people through like the circumstances of everyday life. And I want to be able to experience that. And so like fasting opens our mind up to be able to see that. Like whenever I'm just scrolling through Instagram and then look up, like it takes a while for your brain to like kind of resituate yourself in the world. And so that practice of being off of the internet or being away from distractions through asceticism does like just open yourself up more to hear God. And St. John of the Cross says that God's first language is silence, which is a beautiful quote. Well, could you talk a little briefly about the night vigil? Because I know this is a very ancient tradition, that that Christians have had, just the concept of vigil. Now, some Christians have like stayed up all night for certain feasts, but I've just heard very beautiful stories of people praying during the night and doing this type of vigil. I also know it's frequently mentioned in the Bible as well. But
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the a very short saying in the Desert Fathers is about Arsenius and how he used to, in the Orion's position, turn towards the east and wait, for the sun to rise. um, and I think he slept for an hour a night. I think that he actually has another saying that you're not a true monk if you're, sleeping more than an hour or something like that. It's like, well, I'm not a true monk.
yeah,
But yeah, vigils, ancient practice. I mean, it's literally in the Psalms, this idea of waking at night to pray, praying 7 times a day. Then we see it enshrined in the rule, of Saint Benedict as well. Matins is, traditional hours 2 a.m. and in many, orders that's bumped back, and for good reasons. I think even um, Teresa of Avila, actually, one of the reforms that she made to her Carmel was so she ended the vigil because I thought she said that it would kind of compromise charity within their community. So, I think it's just important to say, like, there's no one size fits all kind of thing here. Um, but vigils are a really interesting aspect of our tradition that are I don't even think you can say they're underemphasized. They're just not talked about at all. And I think that's unfortunate. I really do. And I think that's definitely one of the reasons why our St. Michael's Own experience has been so interesting and attractive, to guys today. I do like to really moderate the idea of vigils, though, because people are like, oh, that's extreme. You would wake in the middle of the night to pray. And it's like people do this all over the world every night in adoration chapels everywhere. Okay. So it's not that extreme. The other thing is, in traditional orders, many of them, I mean, I have one 45 minutes away from me. They wake up every night, middle of the night in a cloister, to pray. And then I also like to just say, like, as lay people, especially with young kids, like you're doing vigils every night,
yeah,
sometimes 10 times a night, waking up for your kids. And if you can kind of keep a sacramental view of those sacrifices, like that, those are your vigils. Those can become prayers, with your little ones,
yeah.
um, as well. So I don't know. I like to kind of balance them by just remembering those, those basic things. But I just say, our experience of vigil last year was so powerful. I didn't really know what to think. Um, we had talked about it as a team. We discern everything that we do, for extended periods, and we just had this really interesting confirmation, like that we should try it. And I'll save that grace, but we were like, okay, let's go for it. And we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what guys would say, and some of those hours, of course, are you're just tired, and there's not much. But there are other times when you are stunningly aware, and there's no distractions, and if you can go outside, which is always the best, it's so still, at night, and there's none of the same burdens, none of the same work beckoning you, or um, even just normal human communication. It's so still. It's a time when it really does feel like you are participating in the perpetual song of the angels, which is kind of an important theme for us, for St. Michael's Lent in particular. And just incredible what regular guys everywhere said, about their experience. And of course, you're tired the next day, you feel a little off. Sometimes it can be a little tough to get back to sleep, for sure. And I had that experience too. um but there's something about kind of waking, doing something extraordinary for God, where in his good pleasure, he does extraordinary things for us, as well. So we do a guided meditation on the Exodus 90 app. That actually, it's very monastic. We work through Psalms, readings from the life of Francis, some scripture, a little bit of art too, and just to try to center the experience. But yeah, vigils. Let's bring them back.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's this really cool, really awesome priest that is actually the station at the parish nearest to me. I don't always go there just because they uh, have Spanish masses, and I'm don't speak Spanish, unfortunately. I should, but he has this tradition every third Friday of the month. He has a 3 a.m. mass, and then he personally goes up and does benediction on every single person in the at the mass with the monstrance, Jesus exposed the
Wow.
monstrance. Yeah, and it's 24-hour adoration as well. So like
Okay.
during that, so he's just really awesome. He's like the modern day Saint John Vianney. He's in confession like 60 hours a week and just the
Wow.
tank 2 masses a day. He's awesome, but we're very blessed to have him. But it's so funny. He has this the flock notes, the text app, and he's a missionary priest from Spain, and very very big baritone voice. So every time I read his text messages, I just think of him saying it out loud. He'll do these like random words in all caps. He's like, "Come to Jesus tonight. 24 hours only now." Like almost like he's selling something. It's like, bring your prayers to Mary. Like, and then he'll randomly be like, "Don't say it's unsafe outside. It is completely safe. People come every month. Come." But he'll like text in all caps, and then it's funny. Great guy. Amazing priest. Just to kind of close it off, Jamie, one, thanks again for coming on. But what would you say, kind of tying in this idea of vigil and maybe the practice of being vigilant and understanding, there is a spiritual realm, but and also that there's like war going on, especially something that men are attracted to. Um, why should men do St. Michael's Lent? Um, and in particular, maybe adding on to that, like I'm gonna upload this like as soon as we get off. Gonna edit it and upload it, but people may not listen or come to the decision to do it through maybe praying about it for a couple days until maybe a couple days, couple weeks in. What would you say also to those people who are potentially joining late and like your encouragement for them?
Yeah, well, first off, it's just never too late to begin, and our journeys, guys start every day, and just kind of they pick up, where we are. So we just like to say, no matter where you've come from and where you're headed, there's a place for you in our growing brotherhood of men, all around the world, guys striving to become, yeah, uncommonly free, for our time, to respond generously to that unique task that our Lord has called upon them. That's what the brotherhood is ultimately for. I'd say, guys come to Exodus for all kinds of different reasons, and it's typically, I think, best to identify like why would you want to take an adventure like this? And I just think asking ourselves from time to time questions like, am I free? Am I flourishing today? Am I thriving? And just allowing, kind of in an examination of conscience, just allow yourself to speak. And it's amazing, what can bubble up inside, when you kind of give permission to just listen to yourself, but and then to ask the Lord, what do you want from me? And so, it's typically what comes up, that drives you, into an Exodus experience, to seek greater freedom. I'd also say perhaps in particular with St. Michael's Lent, it's about really growing in the capacity to see with Catholic vision. So it took me a long time to realize this, but it wasn't really until college, and I was in the faith early by God's grace, and I was very fortunate for that, mostly because of the example of my father and also some priests and stuff. Longer stories for maybe another day. But it wasn't until college that I really realized that the cross is truly the measure of everything. And it's so easy for this kind of like church and state idea, this kind of compartmentalization of the faith, to infect us. And that is not a vision of the faith shared to us in the Catholic Church and modeled to us by the saints all throughout time. When you're baptized into Christ, you are in his body. You are a member and one with him and with all believers. And as a result, we should really see together that the cross measures everything. And it's so easy in our world to drift away and for the faith to just get bracketed into these parts of our life and into these times of the week. And really what we're after here is to enter into a different vision of faith, which helps us to, I think, keep everything in the proper perspective, kind of sub specie aeternitatis, kind of under the measure of eternity. And that's a constant effort and a constant practice and a constant, cultivation. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, we'd love to kind of take that journey together. Again, the faith is not something we do, at just this moment in time. It's not a feeling. It's not a sentiment. And our faith is not a blind faith. We've not been asked to leap, without reason. It's a seeing faith. But we have to cultivate that vision. And I think growing in our capacity for prayer, asceticism, with the support of others on the way, is a helpful framework to do that.
Excellent. So closing off, like where all can the men find these resources?
Yeah, check out the Exodus 90 app. It's the easiest way to get started. You can also check out our website, exodus90.com. We're on most social media platforms as well. And so we're there where most people are today, and love to welcome you into our brotherhood. And that's the next step, and we'd love to have you.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jamie, for coming on. It's been a real treat and a real blessing. I'm excited to jump into St. Michael's Lent and grow in deeper relationship, one with our Lord, but also St. Michael. Especially, I feel like alongside St. Joseph, he's just really a saint for our time, for men. And then also kind of living after the model of St. Francis of Assisi. Yeah, it's just going to be excellent and I'm sure life-changing. So for everyone else out there, I'll leave links to the app as well as their website and any other materials in the link description. And I look forward to having you back on next time to hear how Jesus Christ and his church are the answer to the question, what is truth?